Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome back to the Raid Starter Pack. So the topic for this video will be breaking into Hydra Clan Boss, specifically focusing on normal difficulty, i.e. your first major team. This is a direct result of the poll that I put out asking you guys what next you wanted to see in the Raid Starter Pack series. So stay tuned for the next poll on my community tab page asking you guys what you'd like to see next. Hydra, the bane of a lot of players' existence because they feel like it's super daunting. It's super complicated. I don't have the right champions for it. I can't really do enough damage. It doesn't make sense, etc. I've heard basically everything under the sun, but I'm here to show you a team that is simple, straightforward, and most importantly, scalable up to at least hard difficulty. So a couple of things to touch on here at the start are why on earth would you want to do Hydra Clan Boss in the first case? In my opinion, I would say that you definitely want to get your hands on Mithrala Lifebane as soon as possible. She is a very, very powerful champion that you can use just about anywhere, especially the earlier on in the game that you get her. And what I've been hearing from people more in the early to mid game is that it's actually easier to get Mithrala Lifebane than it is to get Lydia the Death Siren from Faction Wars. So Hydra is definitely something you want to put in focus at the appropriate time. And the appropriate amount of time, in my opinion, is of course highly varied, but I would say somewhere between around 6 months to a year of regular and consistent play. Of course, you might get luckier than some by pulling some super S tier Hydra champions that will help you progress a lot faster than others, or you might have absolutely none of them and you might be getting shafted by RNGesus. So it kind of depends, and that's why I'm giving a pretty large range. But by the time you reach 1 year in the game, you should have pretty fleshed out teams for like the core dungeons, for your Demon Lord Clan Boss, etc. And so then at that point you should, and arena teams as well. And by that point you should be able to put a little bit more effort and focus into Hydra specifically. And so this is the team we're going to be talking about today. We've got a handful of legendaries and a couple of epics. Notably, 2 of the legendaries you are guaranteed to get just by playing the game. You get Drexthar Blood Twin from the Bazaar. You get Visix from the 270-day login champion or login rewards. If you're starting in the more recent times around the recording of this video or the posting of this video, you should have access to a promo code that should still allow you to get Sun Wukong. And obviously you should have the raid or the ninja promo, re-promo shall we call it, for getting him. So he should be still accessible at least at the time and posting of this video. Then we have a couple of epics in there. We have Rector Wrath and then we have Stagnite. So first I'm going to break down how this team works and a couple of caveats that are associated with that. And then I'll show you guys how it performed on my account. So for starters, I want to get this out of the way that technically speaking, yes, Hydra is a fairly complicated connection of different heads with a lot of different abilities, actives and passives and whatnot. But when it comes to normal Hydra Clan Boss, you can kind of just DPS them down. And I know that doesn't seem as possible if you're more earlier on in the game, but it is definitely possible with a respectable quality of gear to just kind of DPS the heads down. You don't really have to deal with much of their mechanics. But nonetheless, we created this team so that we're not indexing too hard into that type of strategy with like Lydias and Whispers and all this other type of stuff and Hex champions, etc. That is an option that you could also do, but it's just a lot harder and you're probably gonna have to be a little bit further in your development to pull off a team like that, where it's just all out DPS, skip all the mechanics, ally attacks and counterattacks and all that kind of stuff. So the reason I chose this particular team is because it adds in some of the things that you're going to want as you progress through the higher difficulties of Hydra Clan Boss, while also kind of indexing into the more DPS heavy aspect that you can get away with in the lower difficulties. So with that, let's hop over to the Hydra hierarchy, which will be linked in the description box down below if you guys want to check it out for yourselves. And basically, this is just my opinion, but it's a categorization of all of the buffs, debuffs, and instant effects in the game and how valuable they are in terms of benefiting you in a Hydra Clan Boss fight. So green is what I would subjectively call a must-have, something that you really, really want on every single team in order to ensure a lot of damage is dealt and a higher rate of success. Something that's nice to have is helpful, but not mandatory. And these are just beneficial things that can help improve your damage or help improve survivability, but they are not necessarily mandatory for dealing with some of the boss's mechanics. Auxiliary is just auxiliary. It's a bonus, but it's definitely not that helpful, and useless is useless. I go into a lot more detail about each of these in my other Hydra Starter Pack video, which focuses on hard difficulty and beyond, and focuses more on counteracting what each of the heads can do. So the team we're focusing on today is down here at the bottom, and as you can see, compared to the other difficulties, and these were the like representations of the hierarchy in terms of buffs, debuffs, and instants from all of my other teams, which I dove more into in a separate video showcasing all of my Hydra teams. Both of those videos will be linked in the card above if you want to check those out for yourselves. But as you can see, this normal version is a lot smaller in terms of the scope of all the buffs and debuffs, as you'd expect, because this is meant to be a starter team. It's not going to be some of the endgame teams. You're not going to have all the endgame champions right away. So starting things off, we have Drexthar Blood Twin, who is bringing a Provoke, which is great against the Head of Decay, which will prevent him from using his abilities, the Cleanse and the Life Barrier buff, which can be very, very annoying and definitely can end runs. He has decreased attack, but it's only on targets where he places the Provoke, so it can only really be used against the Head of Decay. So that's why the asterisk is in place here, because it's not truly an AoE decrease attack, for example. And then of course he's well known for his HP burn passive, and active on the A1 he can just place it, but when he's attacked there's a good chance that he places it on enemies who attack him. So it's not really listed here, but he's also really, really good against the Head of Blight, who obviously puts out Poison Cloud, which can be negated by having HP burn on the enemies. And so whenever any head does an AoE attack, there's a great chance that when they hit him, they're going to put HP burn on themselves. And thus we have to worry a little bit less about if and when Poison Cloud gets out there. Next, we're bringing in Visix, who kind of echoes Drexthar a little bit. We're bringing in another AoE Provoke. She also has an AoE decrease speed, and then Ally Protection, which can protect other champions on your team from taking more damage. Decrease speed is of course great because it slows down the heads, which means you get to lap them and take more turns. They take less turns, you do more damage, etc. Sun Wukong, of course, really powerful DPS champion, but in terms of Hydra utility, he has the buff steal and the block buffs ability, which is nice because it's affinity friendly, because he does the block buffs before attacking, and then he steals the buffs before attacking as well, so he can benefit from anything he might steal back from the heads. Or if they don't have anything, he just blocks buffs, and unless you prevent a lot of the annoying heads from putting buffs on themselves or on their allies. Stag Knight is our primary debuffer because he has AoE decreased defense, AoE decreased attack on the same ability, and then decreased speed on the A1 single target. So that's just handy. Obviously, decreased attack, you take less damage. Decreased defense, you deal more damage. So you're going to want to incorporate those, of course, into every version of any team you're going to be running. We have Rectored Wrath in there because she is our primary healer. She has a revive. She has a perfect veil, which helps us mitigate the Head of Torment a little bit. But this is probably the most flexible spot on the team because obviously a lot of people won't specifically have Rectored Wrath. She could be any healing cleanser type champion on your account, depending on who it is. But ideally, she is ideal because she just negates the Head of Torment directly. And then Ninja, of course, kind of like Wukong, a DPS powerhouse, and his scalability with his attack on the passive is very strong as well. But he has a little bit of the reflex set on the A3, where he can decrease the cooldown of his bread and butter ability, the Hell Burn, the HP Burn placing, and the HP Burn activation. And then he has decreased defense on the A1, which again, we're primarily relying on Stag Knight for that purpose, but nonetheless, he can also place it on his A1. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the damage output from this particular team on my account, and they did a whopping 123 million damage on normal. It took about 35 minutes, and I will say that I ran this team on semi-auto. What that means is that it is generally speaking full auto, but whenever someone got consumed, I would click on the heads to make sure they attack the right one, and thus they could free the champion. If we take a look at the damage breakdown behind my head, I think Drexthar is at 23 million damage. Obviously, that's a lot of the HP burn, but he is also built for damage. Visix the Unbowed is dropping 19 million. That is due to the Hex. We'll talk about the gear of the champions a bit later, but she is in a cursed set, so that's why she's getting a lot of credit for the Hex damage. Sun Wukong, 28 million damage, almost carrying the team, but not quite. We'll see. Obviously, we can see Ninja's carrying the team. Stag Knight, reasonable, 3 million damage. Rectored Wrath, a little bit, 1.6. And then Ninja, most powerful DPS on the squad, 45 million damage. This team did not make it all the way to the turn limit, so there's definitely more room for improvement in that regard. But nonetheless, it's a pretty respectable amount of damage. But before you freak out and say, hey, you're endgame, there's no way I could pull this off with the gear that you have. And that is definitely true. But the thing that you need to take into account here is that for normal, in order to just get the maximum amount of rewards and work your way towards Mithrala, all you need to do is try and get 7 million damage. So even if you have 1/10 of the quality of my gear and you can drop 10 million damage against normal mode, you're going to be good to go. So for transparency, let me just mention all of the gear sets that are on these champions because some of it is kind of important. I can't show you the usual post-fight screen because I don't actually run normal mode on my account, and so I don't want to waste a key on normal mode. But I will mention that Drexthar Blood Twin is in a Guardian set, so he is a little bit of protecting, or a little bit of ally protection for the team on top of Visix, who does it herself. I already mentioned that Visix is in a Cursed set, so that is bringing in the Hex, which helps us be able to target the Head of Mischief, but also just enables a little bit more damage with how Hex works and how it splashes extra damage. Sun Wukong is in Savage, of course. He's built more for the arena, but he can do dual purpose in terms of this because we don't really care how squishy he is because he revives himself. Stag Knight is in a Shield set just because because I didn't want to change his build from the way I have it for the showcase, but I would probably recommend that you run him in Relentless or Reflex or probably Curse, depending on the quality and amount of gear that you have to offer. Rectored Wrath is in a reflex set to reduce the cooldown of her healing and or revive, whichever is needed at the time, and then Relentless on Ninja is the way I run him. And again, I will show you the builds later on at the end, but I want to mention their gear sets just because it is important for the context of and composition of this team. So now I'll address the biggest gripe that people have when it comes to Hydra Clan Boss, which is I don't have that champion. So I already mentioned that Drexler basics are guaranteed to get just by playing the game long enough. Sun Wukong and Ninja are more accessible if you happen to be playing around the appropriate times, and some might say, hey, Rector Wrath, I don't have her yet. That's fine. Like I said, this could be any healing, reviver, cleanser on your account. Could be Reliquary Tender if you wanted to use a rare. Could be Elva Autumnborn if you happen to have her. Could be Syl of the Drakes. Whoever you have, someone who can heal and revive, ideally cleanse as well, but that might not be available, so you can use whoever you have as long as you have a reviver in the team in case people die, because a lot of the times people will die, especially if you're building a high damage comp and block buffs isn't properly maintained the entire time. You can hit reflect damage and your high DPS can actually just kill themselves. For Stag Knight, the functional equivalent would be Duck the Pierce, just because he also has decreased defense and decreased attack. However, I would say that if your problem is that you're dying, then I would opt for a champion who just has decreased attack more so than decreased defense, just because you're trying to make sure that you survive long enough to do an appropriate amount of damage, which is more important. And again, all you need to do for normal mode is around 7 million damage. If you find that your survivability is fine and you want to go more towards the damage, then you bring in someone with decreased defense and or weaken, and that would do a lot more damage. There are plenty of improvements that you can make on this team framework as well, depending on who you happen to have. We don't have increased speed, we don't have turn meter fill, we don't have increased attack or increased defense for attack-based or defense-based nukers, and then we don't have strengthen to take less damage, we don't have weaken to deal more damage, etc. The list goes on. So there's a lot of improvements that can be made. So just as an example, let's go ahead and run this team for a little bit, and I want to show you how quickly we can get to that 1 key damage, that 6.3 I think, but we'll try and approach the 7 million damage. There isn't anything crazy going on with the AI presets, but we do want like Visix, for example, to open with the provoke ability because we want to start controlling the Head of Decay as soon as possible. And then to mimic that, we're also delaying the AoE provoke on Drexler for the subsequent turn because we don't want them to use their provoke abilities at the same time. For most of them, they kind of do what they do. Like Ninja is just free to do whatever because he kind of knows who to target. I guess Visix, I think you need to tell her to use her decreased speed ability because sometimes she doesn't want to use it, which can be very, very annoying. But yeah, you can see there we're, 40 seconds in, we already killed one of the heads. It didn't really matter. Yes, we have Rector Wrath in there to mitigate the true fears, but, we can DPS the heads down fairly easily and it's not that big of a deal. And one thing that you might note that we have, or that we're not dealing with at all, is mischief tanking. There is no mischief tank on this team. Rectored Wrath, as we'll see, does have a good bit of resistance in her build, but there's nothing to force the Head of Mischief to target her. So the Head of Mischief is technically allowed to do or target whoever he wants, and he's going to steal turn meter, he's going to steal buffs, but we also don't have that many buffs on this team. You can't steal Perfect Veil or anything like that, but he could steal Ally Protection, which, okay, didn't happen to do it that time, but he could steal Ally Protection, which would make Visix take a little bit more damage, and he could steal the increased accuracy that's placed occasionally from the likes of Stag Knight on his passive. So sometimes the Head of Decay is going to cleanse. It's not that big of a deal, but near the end of the run it might be a big deal breaker, but near the beginning it's not that big of a deal. So you can see here we're about 90 seconds in, 5.7 million damage. We're almost there, a couple more hits, and we should be there. So yep, 6.1 million, 6.3, again we'll go up to 7 million, but you can kind of see how it works. It's a pretty basic team. There's nothing crazy going on here. It's not supreme ally attack, high DPS, any of the crazy comps you see out there. It's a fairly simple and accessible team, and it can definitely do the job and get you to the 1 key. So there we go, 7 million, or I guess 8.4 million there. We can end the battle. And yeah, so it's pretty straightforward, and I think it's a fairly accessible team with champions that you should be able to get at least at the time of this recording or the time of this posting, and with a couple of epics that you should be able to get. Obviously mine are empowered, but I think that's relatively minor in terms of what they can deal, because these aren't really the DPS on the team. So now, as promised, let's talk about the builds on these champions. And of course, I will fully acknowledge that these are definitely endgame builds, and so you may not be able to reach these levels of stats within your first year of playing. And we'll talk about the things that you can probably forego or that are most certainly overkill for this particular difficulty of Hydra Clan Boss. So first up, we have Rector Wrath, who is built in a reflex set and a speed set. Now, first things first, I will say reflex is most certainly a luxury, and if you only have like triple speed to put her in, that will work. If you have relentless to put her in, that's great. If you have reflex to put her in, that's even better. So you can kind of mix and match whatever you have, but if all else fails, just make her very, very fast and allow her to take a lot of turns, and she will do a similar amount of supporting for your team. So her total stats are as follows: 61,000 on the HP, 3,100 on the defense, 276 on the speed, 543 on the resistance. Now, for normal mode, in terms of resistance that you would need to resist the Head of Mischief, basically you would need to aim for around 350, so 500 is most certainly overkill. The more the better, of course, but if you want to index more into speed and target only 350 accuracy, that is most certainly the case. Or if you can only get to 250 speed and then 350 resistance, that is appropriate, and that will most certainly work. In terms of the blessing, I was fortunate enough to get a 6-star soul for her, so I do have Miracle Heal, and that just helps mitigate some of the effects of the Head of Decay's passive, reducing your max HP. So while it's alive, and more importantly while it's decapitated, you can restore your max HP so that you're a little bit more tanky when it comes to taking damage from any of the other heads. And then for the masteries, we're indexing more on this defense and support tree. He's most certainly not a DPS, so we're coming down here to Unshakable to get even more resistance. That is a great way to get more resistance into your build, and so you would only need like 300-ish from your stats and your Great Hull, and then you get an extra 50 from the masteries. Notably, Solidarity will also increase resistance by putting continuous heals under the Veil on your team, and in addition to her passive, that also just adds 50 resistance for being under a Veil, so keep that in mind as well. And the support tree coming down, grabbing a lot of the healing masteries, but bumping over to Lore of Steel just to get a little bit more stats, a little bit more speed in this case, and then of course ending on lasting gifts to extend the duration of all of her buffs. Next up, we have Stagnite, who, like I said, on my account is currently in a shield set for other pieces of content, but if you wanted to use him specifically for the Hydra Clan Boss, then I would definitely recommend Relentless, Reflex, and or Cursed, and so that you would get more bang for your buck in terms of doing more damage and enabling you to target the Head of Mischief. So his total stats are as follows: 65,000 on the HP, 3,000 on the defense, 243 on the speed, and then 366 on the accuracy. So now in terms of accuracy that you would need for normal difficulty, it's only about 200. So it's really, really achievable, especially if you have a banner for that specific champion. And you can even see that he has an accuracy banner on, but it's not even maxed out. So realistically, he's probably closer to around 400 accuracy in this current build, but I didn't bother because I just don't need the extra stats currently. But if you have a 5-star banner on him, a couple of pieces of perception perhaps, and then some other 4-piece set, if you can swing it, then he can definitely get to these stat requirements. For the blessing, because he is doing a big AoE attack, cruelty is probably one of the best ways to go. And he also decreases defense, so it helps him do his job a little bit better anyways. And then for the masteries, unfortunately, as I keep mentioning across many, many videos, he's been on the list for a long time, but he does not yet have them. But if I were to choose them, I would put him in the pretty standard debuff for masteries. And what that means is I would hug the left-hand side of the offense tree, come all the way down and end on War Master to inflict bonus damage when targeting bosses. And for the support tree, I'd basically hug everything on the right-hand side and end on Sniper and Master Hexer. For the ninja build, I do have mine in Relentless and Perception, which honestly is a fairly old style of build. A lot more modern people run him in regen and remove all the damage, but I have always seen him as more of a damage dealer on top of the HP burn activation, but I digress. So his build on my account is 55,000 on the HP, 3,800 on the defense, 236 on the speed, full crit rate 221 on the crit damage, and then 330 on the accuracy. One thing to note is that he is in an HP percentage chest, not an attack percentage chest on my account, because I just want to improve his survivability a little bit. But technically we do get most of his damage from having the HP burn activation, but he is built to do some damage with a little bit of attack that he has. For the blessing, I did go with Brimstone. We have only a 1-star on him, which is what a lot more people would have access to just by maybe doing a little bit of Iron Twins or participating in some events that give you a little bit of Mortal Soul Stones. You might just happen to get lucky from your wish list or the 1-stars, etc. But yeah, 1-star Brimstone is all we need. Brimstone is, I guess I didn't mention it in the hierarchy, but it is helpful on heads that not the Head of Decay, because you want to keep him provoked most of the time, and he might cleanse if he has it on him. But any of the other heads, if they eat someone, that counts as an ability, so you can get the Brimstone proc or if they use any of their active abilities, they can get the Brimstone proc. So it's a little bit of extra bonus damage if you can swing it, but it is not necessarily mandatory on any given composition, and it's a lot less powerful the higher up you go. For the masteries, we did a little bit of a spin on the standard debuff for mastery, so we are definitely hugging the left-hand side of the offense tree, but I wanted to branch over and get Cycle of Violence just because in other content where I use him, he does hit fairly hard, and so we just have the chance to reduce the cooldown of his Hailburn ability, but we do end on tier 6 for War Master to deal with damage against bosses. And the support tree, we're coming down, picking up mostly the accuracy stuff, and then notably ending on Sniper for the A1, and then a Master Hexer for the HP burns. Drexthar Blood Twin, like I mentioned before, he is in a Guardian set, so again, he's just kind of absorbing some of the damage on behalf of the other team, which helps keep other squishier people from dying all the time, specifically to the head of Wrath. His total stats are as follows: 47,000 on the HP, 4.4k on the defense, 213 on the speed, full crit rate, 218 on the crit damage, and 334 on the accuracy. Now when it comes to damage, you can most certainly build champions like Ninja and Drexthar to not really be powerhouse DPSs, and they could just use their abilities or their passives in order to deal damage. Again, the HP burn is one of the primary modes of dealing damage. In this particular comp, we can counter the Head of Blight just by having Drexthar in the team, and then Ninja, of course, can just help activate and place more HP burns. So if you aren't able to pull off, a good level of damage stats on top of keeping them survivable enough for your composition, then you can most certainly forego the crit rate, crit damage, and focus on keeping them alive and allowing their passives and active abilities to do their job. Just like Ninja, we have Brimstone on Drexthar. Similar thing, he has enough accuracy to land, and it just does a little bit of bonus damage whenever it procs. And then for the Master is kind of going down the standard debuffer route, but on the offense tree, we're branching over to Giant Slayer because, of course, Drexthar has a triple hitter on the A1, so it's a little bit more effective than War Master on him. And then the support tree, pretty standard debuffer masteries, but we're ending on Sniper. And you could most certainly go for Master Hexer, but in my case, I opted not to because primarily when he's placing it on his passive, it's when he's hit, and he gets hit basically every time they take a turn. So they're more likely to replace the 2-turn debuff on themselves than it is to just place the 3-turn on any given instance. So it's usually up the entire time unless they have Decay cleanses things off. And so I didn't really find it valuable, but you might feel differently and you might want to go all the way down to Master Hexer. Next up, we have Visix the Unbowed in the Curse set combined with a Speed set. Her total stats are as follows: 50,000 on the HP, 3,000 on the defense, 235 on the speed, and then 300 on the accuracy, which again is enough to overcome the resistance of the bosses, and the speed is respectable. A Curse set, again, it places Hex on the heads, allows you to target the Head of Mischief, but also enables a little bit more, or a lot more, damage overall over the course of the run. For the Blessing, like Stagnite, she does have some AoE abilities, so Cruelty helps us reduce the defense of the targets and enables us to deal a little bit more damage. For the Mastery, it's fairly standard debuffer style, but we're branching a little bit differently here. Life Drinker, notably, just because she is taking a lot of damage on behalf of the team, so when she does it, one of or two of her AoEs, she can heal herself up a little bit if she's a little bit low on health, but we still come down and end on War Master. And then the support tree, a little bit of a departure for the standard debuffer Mastery is just because she does place a shield, so it's a little bit bigger when she does that ability, but ultimately ending on Master Hexer because of the decreased speed in order to increase the duration of that. And she doesn't actually need Sniper because everything she places has a 100% chance, so you can save a little bit of Minotaur farming by going that route. And then lastly, we have my Sun Wukong, who I mentioned is in an arena build, so he is in Savage and Perception, so this is most certainly overkill for your first bout of normal mode Hydra Clan Boss, but nonetheless it could be something to strive for if you're just using the Wukong style of build. His stats are as follows: 47,000 on the HP, 6,000 on the attack, 248 on the speed, full crit rate, 262 on the crit damage, and then 322 on the accuracy. For the Blessing, I opted to go with Soul Reap. Again, he is built for the arena, and so if someone happens to survive the nuke that is his A2, there's a good chance that the Soul Reaper is just going to finish him off, and so that's why I opted for that. Obviously, a lot of people, when you get to the higher tiers of Blessings, will go for Polymorph in the arena, but I'm not one of those people. Not a fan of Polymorph. For the Masteries, now we're kind of taking a departure from everyone else showcased on the team because we're focusing more on the nuking side of things. He does have a stun on the A1, so I went with Opportunist. Standard nuking type stuff increases more damage when you're first hitting things or when you kill things, and ultimately ending on Hell's Master to ignore a little bit more defense or have a chance to on top of the Savage set. And then Support Tree, a little bit more accuracy in the build. And then Spirit Haste, if a lot of people are dead, he goes a little bit faster and he can revive himself, obviously, so it's just a little bit helpful stuff from the support tree. So yeah, that's going to do it for this Raid Starter Pack episode on breaking into normal Hydra Clan Boss. Of course, if you're in that targeted time frame of about 6 months to 1 year, you're not going to be able to put up 100 and something million damage, but that's okay, because all you would really need to do to start maximizing your earnings towards the Mithrala fragments, and or just starting to get protection and stone skin gear, and or start participating actively in Hydra Clash, is just to get the 7 million damage you need for the normal mode maximum chest. And then, as I mentioned, this team is definitely scalable, at least up to hard, because we are dealing with some of the boss's mechanics innately, but also just using more accessible champions to do so. So if you happen to get Nekmothar or Mishinaki or Elva Autumnboard or whoever else to improve it, then great. You can start to scale up your stats even more, scale up the difficulty even more, and start creating newer and newer teams. But you can always fall back on this team that can definitely work on normal mode for as long as you run it. Let me know in the comment section down below if you've finally been inspired to delve into Hydra Clan Boss. And once again, feel free to check out the card in the upper right hand corner for the other videos detailing progressing further into the Clan Boss hard and beyond, and then my video showcasing my Hydra teams for the year 2024. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.